Assalamu alaikum and shalom. This is Tahir Ali. Welcome to the book club. We normally have a book club and we normally read a book. Dr. Salim Khalani is the founder of the book club, and we normally read a book and he gives us a book and we read it and we come and discuss the book. This time we are honored to have not only the book, we also have both authors present to discuss the book with us. So with further ado, we're going to talk about We Refuse to Be Enemies by Sabeeha Rehman and Walter Ruby. And I'd like to introduce Dr. Salim Khalani. He is the founder of this book club. I think we have been running it for about 5 years. Dr. Salim Khalani, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Tahir, and thank you so much, Sabeeha Behan and brother Walter Ruby. So it was in June of this year that I attended a Zoom book club organized by my Jewish colleagues. And the book was We Refuse to Enemies, and there was no way I could have refused that invitation. Just because it was written by one of my co-compatriots from Pakistan, but also because the subject is very near and dear to my heart, and I've been involved in interfaith for a very long time in this community, trying to build bridges. One lesson that I learned in that short meeting was that Sabeeha Ben actually noticed that I was perhaps the only Muslim attending. So she called me out. Talk about a book. We talk about the topic, the writers, and the book itself. It's almost impossible for me to introduce the authors of this book. They are themselves present. And I think the best introduction for an author or authors are their words and their works. Presentation that we are going to listen to will actually encompass all these three aspects. The authors will talk about themselves, the topic, and the book itself. And there are so many other things which bring nostalgic memories, like my class fellow and my friend Zeba Hafiz mentioned about being struck on the knuckles by the nuns or by the teachers. And while I was reading the book, and I'll be very brief now, Sabeeha Ben actually does mention certain Pakistani cliches that she adjectivizes as untranslatable. I don't know whether she translated to Walter or not, such as Satya na so tera. I found it very interesting. So I won't waste any further time. As I said, the authors will introduce themselves. Their work testifies to who they are. So Sabeeha Ben and brother Walter Ruby, very welcome to this gathering. And please start and take as much time as you want.
Thank you very much, Salim Bhai, for that introduction. Thank you for Tahir Bhai for handling all the logistics and welcoming us to this forum. I grew up in Pakistan, and during those years, I never met a Jewish person. Pakistan is pro-Palestinian, and to this day, Pakistan has not recognized Israel. In fact, my father's passport was stamped all countries of the world except Israel. And we viewed the Jews through the lens of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And that is literally where I came from when I came to the US in 1971. Walter, had you ever met a Muslim person?
No, Sabeeha, I had not. And by the way, after the show, I would love you to translate that phrase for me that you just mentioned. But anyway, I had never met a Muslim until I was well into my 20s, even though I spent a very important year, very transformative year in my life between the ages of 11 and 12 in Israel. My father, I grew up in the States, in Pittsburgh, the suburbs of Pittsburgh. My father got a sabbatical year as a physicist at the Weizmann Institute in Rehovot, Israel. And for me, it was very, very important in terms of totally bonding with Israel and feeling deeply at home and connected to my true self as a Jew, which I had not felt back in the, growing up in the States in mainly non-Jewish environments. But I think the big thing that I missed that year is that I didn't meet any, any Palestinians, either Muslim or Christian, during that period. But my family moved back to the States after a year, and I did not want to come back. I wanted to stay in Israel. So I vowed, okay, when I grow up, I'm going to go back and live there.
So the first time I encountered a Jewish person was, I had just come to the US. My husband, who was a medical resident, took me to the hospital's Christmas party. Half the medical residents were Pakistani Indian and the other half were Jewish. And these Jewish colleagues of his were being very welcoming to me. So good to meet you. Welcome to the US. Are you lonely? How can we help? I had difficulty reconciling my image of what I thought were the bad guys with these people who were really very nice. Then I find out that the neighbor who lives upstairs in my apartment building, who had taken me under her wing, was Jewish. My husband's boss, who was mentoring him, opening doors for him, was Jewish. I then get pregnant and my obstetrician is Jewish. I have a baby and the pediatrician is Jewish. And then I end up buying a house in an Orthodox Jewish community. I had no idea. I liked the house. We bought the house. And now I find myself surrounded by this very, very Jewish looking neighborhood. My father, who was visiting from Pakistan, said to me, people of faith, no matter what their faith, make good neighbors. And this community will be good for your children because they will raise their children with good values and they will be disciplined in their way of life. Turns out he was right. I also got a bonus out of it because I no longer had to tell my children why we don't eat pork, why we don't have a Christmas tree in the house. And that just made it so much easier. Walter, tell us about your encounter.
Well, I kept my word and I did move back to Israel at the age of 26. And I stayed there for 3 years, which were really the happiest and most fulfilling of my life. While there, I began a career as a journalist, which I continued for many years after that. And in that context, living in the city of Haifa, I covered many stories in the north of Israel, which has a large Israeli-Palestinian population. And I witnessed, and this is the late 70s, I should say, the late 1970s, I witnessed the, firsthand in covering the systematic discrimination endured by the Palestinians. And that, even inside of the borders of the state of Israel, which this was. Even more importantly, however, I learned a really vital life lesson during those visits, which was the transformative power of personal encounters. It was so interesting that the people in those towns, both Muslim and Christian, were just very moved that I came out as a Jew and I was asking questions and I was hearing their side of the story, and that meant a great deal to them. And they treated me with great kindness and hospitality on those encounters. There was one person in particular who was actually a Christian, a Greek Catholic priest named Father Elias Shakur, who was a very charismatic figure, and he impressed me greatly. He had a whole philosophy of nonviolence and self-help, in a sense of, if the government won't build us a community center, let's go out and build it ourselves. And he really, I think, a great man in many ways. But when I would come back to Haifa, to my Jewish friends, and including my cousins who lived on a kibbutz in the north of Israel, not that far, actually very close to this village where I had been with Father Shakur, they looked at me with, they said, you're just a naive American, you don't understand anything, you don't know that, the Arabs would really like to kill us if they could, and so forth. And I remember the conversation that I had with my uncle Ze'ev, who was one of the pioneers of the state of Israel, had come there as a Holocaust survivor and came actually before the Holocaust, but was one of those who helped to upbuild the state, and his wonderful wife, Penina. But anyway, one day in particular, I remember I said to him, but Ze'ev, have you ever been to Ibalin, the village that Father Shakur was from? Because I realized it was only like 10 kilometers away. And he said, of course I have. And I'm reading now from the book. So I said, well, when was the last time you were there? And my uncle furrowed his brow and replied after some thought, well, as far as I can recall, I was there once in 1943 when he was a young man. This was now 1977. So he saw my eyebrows go up, but he said forcefully, Yes, it's been a while since I've been there. So what? Don't think for a moment that just because you were there a few weeks ago and got sweet talked by that priest of yours, that you understand the Arabs better than I do. Listen, I don't need to go to Ibrahim to meet him, to meet Shakur and the others to understand what they want, which is to destroy the state of Israel as soon as they can. And one way they are trying to accomplish that is by pulling the wool over the eyes of Jewish dreamers like you. Well, I love my uncle dearly, and I had to take seriously what he said. After all, I was a newbie. I had only been there a year. But I realized, you know, when you go and meet people face to face, it really changes the dynamic, and you hear their side and you understand their humanity and the commonalities between all of us as human beings, wanting the best for our kids, wanting to build good lives. And so it was a very, very important lesson for me that stayed with me my whole life. Sabeeha?
Yeah, so speaking of commonalities, for me, sharing of those commonalities, and you can call it interfaith dialogue, started by the sidewalk. I was a homemaker in the 70s, raising 2 boys, and I would be hanging out with my Jewish neighbors by the sidewalk, watching our children play, and we'd be standing on the lawn, chatting, and I guess that's where grassroots came from. I must have invited one of them over for dinner, and the conversation may have led to dietary restrictions. And now we are saying, oh, so you don't eat pork either. And so is halal different from kosher? She must have invited me in for coffee, and I would have said, I'm sorry, but it's Ramadan. And what is that? And that is literally from the grounds up how interfaith dialogue started for me. At one point, it occurred to me that it would be a good idea if my Jewish friends could meet my Pakistani Muslim friends, because I didn't want my Jewish friends to believe that I was unique and that I was perhaps not like the rest of them kind of Muslims. And I wanted my Muslim friends to see that, you know, Jewish people are really very good people. So we started gathering in my home, our home, and eventually it led to larger gatherings in larger spaces, in public spaces. And that's how literally from the grassroots, interfaith dialogue began for me. Now, it was, for Walter, it was more top-down, right?
Well, I guess you could say that. I started as really, as I said, as a journalist, and so interacting with and covering amazing stories. I continued working as a journalist for Israeli and Jewish newspapers after I returned to the States during the whole course of the 80s and 90s, covering mainly the peace process from the United Nations, covering the Israeli-Palestinian peace processes, which I had great hopes for, obviously, and was very excited to be a witness to history through much of that period, but it all crashed and burned on, you know, tragically, as you know, in the early 2000s. And I was kind of bereft for a period, looking for, it was a personal tragedy for me. But to make a long story short, I got involved in Muslim-Jewish relations in the States as kind of a alternative path to peace and reconciliation. And then I was hired by the Foundation for Ethnic Understanding, which is run by Rabbi Mark Schneier, an Orthodox rabbi, based in New York, in 2008, and I stayed there for another 9 years until 2017 as the Muslim Jewish program director for the foundation. So I kind of created this whole thing in some ways, or we did, out of whole cloth. Well, what is Muslim Jewish relations? How do you build it? And it became for me basically a lot of going out, either physically traveling or on the phone, linking up rabbis and imams and in the same town, and urging them to do a twinning program. We had an event called the Weekend of Twinning every November. We tried to have as many Muslim Jewish events in as many cities as possible. And so that was really my job for years. I was kind of a matchmaker. We have a word in Hebrew called shadchan. That was really my job, was to match up rabbis and imams, Muslim and Jewish leaders, whether they were women's leaders or youth leaders. Anyway, that was my job. And when I would tell people what I do for a living, a lot of people would say, "Oh my God, that must be the worst job in the world." And I would say with absolute conviction, no, this is the best job. It's going so much better than I really expected at the beginning. I wasn't sure how it was going to go, but yes, there were some setbacks and challenges, which we'll discuss a little bit, but overall, the warmth and the sense of excitement and intellectual curiosity that was going on that I could see with the leaders and the grass and their followers, the members of the mosques and synagogues, was just so inspiring. And seeing these relationships forming, friendships forming, for me, it felt like holy work.
So holy work had some ground rules. We decided that we will focus on commonalities, our shared history, our shared values, and we will keep politics out of it. In fact, I belong to the Sisterhood of Salam Shalom, which has one of its basic rules that for the first 18 months of the formation of a chapter, you will not discuss politics. Why 18 months? Give time for trust and relationships to develop. So for the first 18 months, we didn't discuss politics. After 18 months were over, we still did not discuss politics. Another 18 months went by, we still did not. Things were going so well that nobody really wanted to walk into murky waters. This year, during the Gaza conflict, we did talk about it. In some chapters, we talked about it. In some instances, it worked out well. In other instances, relationships did unravel. So it has been a difficult path some of the time. Walter, tell us about how our paths crossed.
Well, I believe it was 2009, although it could have been 2010. It was the first time I remember speaking to you, Sabeeha, and I had called in my job in terms of bringing together Muslim and Jewish organizations. I had called Daisy Khan, the president of the American Society for Muslim Advancement, the ASMA Society, and got you on the phone, who was working side by side with Daisy, and we. I think we developed, I think it's fair to say, a friendly relationship very quickly, and we were cordial and talked to each other. But I have to say that at that point, we had no idea where the relationship would take us.
So where the relationship took us is that in 2016, my memoir was being published, Threading My Prayer Rug, One Woman's Journey from Pakistani Muslim to an American Muslim. Just a plug. I realized that it would be nice if I could get an endorsement by a rabbi, Walter. Now, Walter is not a rabbi, but he worked for one. So I emailed him. I was actually in Pakistan at the time. And I said, Walter, my book is coming out. And do you think Rabbi Schneier would be willing to write a blurb? And Walter's appropriate response was, I have to read the book. So I emailed him the manuscript. And this nice Jewish gentleman spent his day of rest on a Saturday, read the entire manuscript, wrote back to me and said, Sabeeha, the rabbi would be happy to write a blurb. And I have an idea. Why don't the two of us write a book? Walter, why did you want us to write a book?
Well, two reasons. First of all, I loved your book right from the get-go. I just read it in one sitting, I think over 5 hours, and I never, put it down. Just grabbed me. I thought it was a wonderful story of an immigrants coming to America and the whole process. It's a wonderful book. So I'm putting in a plug too. Beyond that, I had been looking for some time for a Muslim co-author because I wanted for a long time to write a book about our Muslim Jewish movement and share an account of its success. So I needed a Muslim co-author. And I said, wow, this is a Muslim co-author who's a wonderful writer. So let me ask her. So also at that point, 2016, 2017, I felt that we needed this book as a manifesto for why the Muslim-Jewish alliance is needed so badly at a time when both communities feel threatened by the rise of bigotry and authoritarianism in America. And as the two largest minority faith communities here, we need to stand together in support of democracy, human rights, and religious freedom, all of which make Jewish and Muslim life viable in this country. So that was what I came forward with. Sabeeha and I sat down and said, let's see what we can do. So we met, I think the first time, we got together to talk about the book early in 2017. And we, early on we said, there's 4 principles that we've both come to really appreciate deeply and feel that is at the core of Muslim-Jewish coalition building. And we sort of built in some ways the book around laying out these principles, or it was a big part of the book. So we want to share them with you briefly here, the 4 principles. The first one is we have the principle that if you save one life, it is as though you save all of humankind. Now, as all of you folks know, this is in the Quran. It's also in the Talmud, and which was actually several hundred years before the Quran. And it's the same principles, it's said almost in exactly the same way. And it illuminate, I premise that life is sacred and every human soul is sacred. So it's so important that we share this bedrock belief in the preciousness of every single human spirit, and the idea that a little piece of the world dies as one person dies, and all of that. But it's also so revealing that neither that I had not known until I got involved in Muslim-Jewish relations, that this was in the Quran. Had no idea. And as I looked into it, I realized that maybe 1 out of 100 Jews probably today even knows that it's in the Quran, and maybe 1 out of 100 Muslims know it's in the Talmud. So it's so important that we share that we see that incredible commonality. It's not the only one, obviously, there's many, but it was very revealing to me. So that's the first principle. Sabeeha?
The second principle that unites us is welcome the stranger. It is called for in the Quran. It is called for in the Torah. My mother was a stranger in her homeland. My mother lived in India. And when India was partitioned into India and Pakistan in 1947, she made the train trip with her family from India to Pakistan. On the way, trains were attacked, going both ways. Thousands of people were massacred. They barely made it across intact. And when she arrived in her new land, she was welcomed as a stranger. There she lived, there she thrived. And until her dying day, she believed that if there was one place on God's earth that was made for her, it was Pakistan. Now, fast forward to 2017, and the Muslim ban has been announced. And I'll read briefly from the chapter, Welcome the Stranger. I have never been inside a mosque, Rabbi Warnberg said to Khalid is my husband, at Temple Shari Tafila. Khalid called the Islamic Center of New York and made an arrangement for the rabbi to meet the imam. Should I remove my kippah? The rabbi asked as they entered the mosque. Keep it on. The rabbi was very noticeable as a Jewish person. He sat down on the prayer rug beside Khalid and listened to the imam's sermon and stood shoulder to shoulder with the congregation in prayer. As soon as the prayer was over, people started walking up to the rabbi. Thank you for coming, they said as they shook his hand. A distinguished looking gentleman dressed in a white shalwar kameez walked up to the rabbi. I would like to give you a gift, but I have nothing on me. He then held out his hand and showed the rabbi his prayer beads. This is my tasbih. It is a family heirloom, and I would like you to have it. These are the moments when I think of Martin Luther King saying, only in the darkness can you see the stars. Walter, your mother was a refugee too.
She was indeed, and that was one of the incredible commonalities we found in the stories of our two mothers and how they both shaped us. My mother was a refugee from Nazi Germany, who fled as a young Jewish girl with her own mother. She was at, I think, the age of 14. They fled across the border on foot from Germany into Belgium, and didn't know if they would be shot in the back as they ran across the border. And then there was almost a 3-year period where they were kind of on the run, moving from place to place. They were in the south of France, basically in Nice, but then the Nazis conquered France in 1940. And then they were running desperately from port to port like trapped animals trying to find a way out of Europe because they were in imminent peril of being rounded up and taken to the death camps. To make a long story short, they finally managed to get to Portugal, and they were trying then to get American visas, but America was not giving visas to the desperate Jewish immigrants at that time. It was very much like today's, America First ideology, but it was basically they just wanted white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. So my mother and her mother were put on this endless waiting list. They're sitting in Portugal. They don't know any day the Nazis might come there. So they get on a boat. They got a visa to Ecuador, but they got on a boat to New York. And when the boat docked in New York, my grandmother, this would have been sort of prearranged, met with an official of a Jewish organization, a refugee organization called HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, which still exists. And they helped her to find, they took her into the city, my grandmother, and they helped her to find a New York City judge with the same last name who signed an affidavit saying that they were his relatives, that he would take personal responsibility for them, which was an incredible gesture because they really weren't his relatives. But he, anyway, as far as they know, that all happened. But my mother, during that period, while my grandmother was in New York City with HIAS and the judge, my mother was being held as surety on Ellis Island to make sure that her mother would come back. And so she was almost 10 days, I think, held on Ellis Island. That's how they got to America. That's how my mother got to America. And she lived the rest of her life here and, loved this country deeply and made a lot of contributions. She passed away in 2005. And I recall that in 2018, I had the honor to make a speech at a rally outside the U.S. Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court was about to rule on whether the Trump so-called travel ban, really anti-Muslim ban, was legal or not. And so I told my mother's story at that event, just as I'm doing to you now. But I just said, so much of what my mother went through in 1940, 41 is being experienced by Muslim refugees today, desperately trying to get out of Syria and find a haven here, whether it's Syria, Yemen, Afghanistan, Iran, so many, and they're being turned away just because of who they are. And this is obscene, and they're suffering in many of the same ways. So that's why Welcome the Stranger is so important to both Sabeeha and myself. The third principle that we talk about is Isla and Tikkun Olam. So as you know, the Islah is an Arabic word that's usually translated as reform, to improve or to better the world in a sense. Tikkun Olam in Hebrew means repairing the world. So very, very similar. And both can, to me, convey the common moral imperative in both of our faiths. Again, bedrock principles to help those who are most in need, regardless of who they are, what religion, what nationality. We have a moral responsibility to those in need. And we've tried to live out this principle in many Muslim Jewish events that I've been involved with, many focusing on feeding hungry and homeless people, visiting sick and elderly people, doing cleanups in parks and forests, health fairs with Jewish and Muslim doctors together, serving people without insurance. And, for me, I mean, it's great to have discussions about commonalities and what does it say in the Torah, what does it say in the Quran, but and what do we have in common, but to stand together in a homeless shelter with aprons, Muslim alongside Jews, serving hot food to hungry people is such a primal thing, and it really builds relationships that that these friendships that come out of that are just very, very powerful, and it's just a wonderful thing. So that's our third principle.
And the fourth principle is standing up for each other. And again, I'll refer to a brief read from the book, chapter called Standing Up for Each Other. On a bright sunny day in February 2017, soon after the travel ban was announced, Khalid and I stood in Times Square amongst thousands, many waving posters that said, "Today I am a Muslim too," except that most of them were not Muslims. they had gathered there to offer their support and stand in solidarity with us. Walter's organization, the Foundation for Ethnic Understanding, had organized this event. I noticed a lady in a wheelchair. She must have been in her 90s. She could barely lift her head. Think of what it took for her to be there. Somebody had to have helped her into her warm clothing, gotten her into a wheelchair, gotten her out on the sidewalk, put her in a cab, folded the wheelchair and put it in the trunk, brought her into Times Square, the whole process all over again. I'm just breathless talking about it. And there she sat silently protesting against the travel ban. This was a Sunday. People could have been anywhere on their day off, but they chose to come and stand in solidarity with us. And then not too long later, the tables were reversed, and now it was time for the Muslims to stand up for their fellow Jewish Americans. Tell us about it, Walter.
Well, that happened so powerfully on October 27th, 2018, the day that many of you remember a deranged gunman broke into the Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh, which is my hometown, and murdered 11 Jews at prayer. And I'm watching this on CNN, and I'm saying, I'm here in Washington, D.C., and I'm saying, oh my God, for the first time in my life, I don't feel safe as a Jew in America, that such a thing could happen. It never happened before. And then on TV, I see a group of Muslims in Muslim dress outside of the police line around this stricken synagogue, and they're holding up banners proclaiming their love for those inside. They're from the Islamic Society of Pittsburgh, which had a relationship, a twinning relationship with the Tree of Life, and it was so powerful. So they knew each other. They were there. They began raising money for the Tree of Life. That morphed into a nationwide fundraising campaign that raised over $200,000 in the Muslim community, in the national Muslim community, in a couple of days. And then finally, the following weekend, there were more memorial services in synagogues across the country, which were attended by tens of, I don't know the numbers, thousands of Muslims. I would say tens of thousands for sure. Because I was in one synagogue in Virginia, Northern Virginia, and there must have been close to a couple, at least 1,000 Muslims in that who came, without any prompting. They just showed up to be there with their Jewish brothers and sisters. And I remember a man standing very close to me who, he had 2 small children with him, a Muslim man, and we just kind of, as we were listening to the powerful speeches and pain that was being expressed, we kind of just reached out to each other, and there was a moment of kind of hugging, and I was saying, I'm so grateful you're here, but I said, I do wonder, you brought your 2 small children, isn't this maybe too much for them to hear about all this terrible thing? And he said, no, absolutely, I have to be here for my Jewish brothers and sisters. They have to be there. We have to stand together. This could happen to us, it could happen to you. We need to be with each other at such a moment. And that Sabeeha talked about the light and the darkness at certain bleak moments. That was the one that stands out for me over all the work I've done in Muslim Jewish relations. It was so powerful and gives me inspiration and hope, even going as we go forward. Sabeeha?
It hasn't always been easy. We have had our share of challenges. One of the challenges that I have encountered over the years, over the decades, is the difficulty in getting the Muslim community involved in interfaith dialogue and in activism. I am not sure what the impediments are. It could be that we are still a young community in terms of having evolved into becoming activists. It could be that the immigrant trajectory is at a stage where these are young families with young children, they have their jobs, but it could also be that there is distrust. Either way, it has been a challenge. Have you had challenges, Walter?
Oh yeah, and as I often say, the Jewish community. Well, look, I worked in Muslim Jewish relations, as I said, around the country, and actually in Europe as well. And I saw that in one city, you would see the Muslim community maybe holding back, in another city, the Jewish community. You know, so it was both communities. But the thing was, I tried to understand why did people hold back at certain moments, and I saw it sort of two what we call the elephants in the room that really, you know, often people don't talk about, but they're there and they can really affect. One is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the first elephant, and Sabeeha mentioned the whole issue of, do you talk about it and when do you talk about it? So the thing was that we tried not to brush it under the rug, but oftentimes, you know, our focus was, and I think rightfully was building Muslim-Jewish relations here in our various cities. And so when there would be these sudden spasms of violence in Israel and Gaza and in the West Bank, you would see people holding back on both sides. And oftentimes, and I would call people because I would say, well, you have your twinning event getting ready. You know, it's August, it's September. Supposed to do it in November. Oh, I haven't called the imam yet. And then the rabbi who would say that would say, you know, I'm so sorry. You know, I feel really bad. It's just been like a difficult conversation to have. And so that often would be a problem and would hold us up, even though eventually these things would get sorted out, but it would take time. There's another elephant, though, that is talked about much less even than the first, which is doctrines in our respective holy books that offend the other. And there are plenty of examples in the Torah. But you know, to share one with the Quran that had made me uncomfortable for a while was that I felt as I read what the Quran said about the Jews, obviously reading it in English, that it seemed to me very judgmental in a way that made me uncomfortable, that it was kind of shaking the finger at the children of Israel back in the times of the Exodus, you know, and saying, well, you keep, you know, God was doing everything for you, but you kept betraying him. Or, you know, Moses would go up on the mountain and bring back the 10 Commandments, and he'd find you worshiping the golden calf. And this is you know, so there would be that tone, it seemed to me. And at one, you know, so I would ask, so I was uncomfortable with it. So I spoke with both scholars and imams, and, you know, they said, you know, Walter, the point, it says almost exactly word for word in the Torah, what it says in the Quran. The Torah also castigates the Jews, the children of Israel in that time for, you know, not keeping faith with God. So why is it, oh, you know, okay, you're okay with that, but you're not. And I thought about it and I said, you know, that's really true. What it says to me is this, you know, and I thought about it, I think all of our communities, not only our two communities, but other faith communities, the African-American community, the Hispanic community, Asian community. I mean, we all have this thing where we can criticize ourselves, but if somebody else says the same thing, we say, well, that's anti-us, essentially. And so the point that I want to make out of this whole piece is that it's so important to have that uncomfortable conversation. I had that about the Quran, often about Israel, Palestine. Even if you don't necessarily have all the answers, you've got to talk to each other, because if you hold it back and it goes under the rug, then it will affect things in a negative way. So that was the great learning experience I came out from all of that.
So I had a great learning experience too, because as Walter and I were writing this book, and we were getting into a debate and a dialogue over the Israel-Palestinian issue, and that dialogue is in the book, and Walter asked me these questions about, you know, like, is the Quran anti-Semitic? So I had to go back and do my research and come back and say, well, you know, this is what I found, and here is what I have, and that's all in the book. And at one point, Walter said to me, well, what about the 700 Jews that Prophet Muhammad massacred and beheaded? And I said, I don't know what you're talking about. And he said, it happened. So I had to go back to the books, you know, pull them off my library, get them from the library, buy them, study them, call the imams, call the scholars, you know, call my network and say, what is this all about? And then I came back to Walter with what I had learned and what I found, and that's in the book. And then Walter would challenge me again and say, well, what would Jesus have done? Oh, what would Jesus have done? Back to the books. Come back to Walter with my answer. And this just continued, and Walter kept challenging me. Well, you know, you say that the Kaaba, you know, is the place where Abraham left baby Ishmael and Hagar, but it wasn't over there. It wasn't in Mecca. It was in Beersheba. So now I'm back to, you know, the Quran as the source. And so it really, just having Walter constantly challenging me educated me, prompted me to get an education. And I include all that in the book, and I thank Walter for that. So before we move on to the last quick piece on some of the lessons we have learned, in addition to the lessons I learned, Walter, is there anything you wanted to add to our back and forth on these issues?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I said, what would Jesus have done? It was also a reproach to my own people. Because I always had the sense that both Islam and Judaism were kind of harsh, based on what I knew in both of the books, and I learned a great deal about the loving, merciful qualities, for example, of Islam from Sabeeha, which I certainly hadn't known. The one that she mentioned about Beersheba is it's an interesting one, only because I said that when I first came to Israel, I had lived in Beersheba, and this is where according to our tradition, Abraham had been domiciled basically as a nomad, living near Beersheba. And I used to go out into the desert when I was living there and meet with Bedouins and be invited into their tents. So I had a very strong sense that this is where it happened, because that's where they were living. And so they were, Ishmael and Hagar were cast out, as you know, and we talk about that a lot. And I have some guilt feelings about that. Sabeeha says you really shouldn't. Anyway, that's a long story. But the point is that for me, that geographical sense, and I said, well, how would they have gotten from their 900 miles or 1,000 miles to Mecca, on one, couple of loaves of bread and one canteen of water, essentially. And Sabeeha said, well, there's caravans, and you could be there in 10 days. And anyway, it was a great dialogue, and so there's a lot to be said about it. But thanks so much for asking.
Yeah, and at one point, Walter said to me, "You must hate Sarah for what she did to Hagar."
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "No, we don't. We revere Sarah. We name our children Sarah. We said Fatiha at her grave at the tomb of the patriarchs. We don't believe that she threw him out. That's not our narrative. We believe this was God's instruction to Abraham." So that was like, oh, okay, let's put Hagar and Sarah's conflict to rest. So anyhow, we learned a few lessons along the way, and we're running out of our allotted time, so I'll go through it quickly. The number one is that we are Americans first, and we have to put America first. This is our homeland and our community. And even though the Israeli-Palestinian conflict means deeply to us, yet we live here and not there. And unless Muslims and Jews come together as minority communities, pluralism and democracy is threatened. January 6th was just the prologue. We see the effect that it has taken with voting rights and everything else that goes along with it. Bigotry and prejudice is on the rise. It is important that we come together and not let the Middle East conflict divide us here at home. Second lesson we learned was that we should speak out and stay engaged together against injustice here and overseas. Number third, Muslims and Jews should work together to support the work of NGOs that are doing work in Israel and Palestine to help save lives. And Walter is an example of that. He's involved in Project Rosanna that transports children from Palestine to Israel every day, brings them back and forth from the hospitals so that they can get medical care. And number four, allow others to speak up, whether we agree with them or not. Some of the things that Ilham Umar and Rashida Tlaib have said have hurt the sensibilities of the Jews, but they have as much right to speak up, to advocate for the rights of Palestinians in the halls of Congress, as do Jewish representatives like Chuck Schumer. Walter, you want to run through the last four?
Sure. Number five, we should not let the Israeli-Palestinian conflict be weaponized in ways that drive our communities apart. And we see this happening all the time, where politicians and oftentimes are pandering, I think, to the Jewish community in ways that are very, can drive Muslims and Jews apart. For example, there's been this whole battle over the BDS movement, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, which wants to put an economic price to, in a sense, boycott Israeli products. And my point is that although I don't agree with this movement, I think that they have an absolute right to make those to advocate for divest for boycott. That's a long American tradition, and so. So that's one, and we've seen this even more absurdly overreaction, I think, with the whole Ben and Jerry's controversy. If you followed that a few months ago, where Ben and Jerry's just said we're not going to sell our ice cream anymore in the occupied Palestinian territories, and Israel and the American Jewish community decided to punish them, and so now American states have passed laws, actually, or I should say they've made moves to withdraw their support. They've invested. All states invest in different companies, and they're now New Jersey recently said we are divesting from Ben and Jerry's and its parent company Unilever. So that's another example. I can talk about more in Q&A if you want. It's important that we do not denigrate or demonize people on either side. So, sometimes I see this happening. For example, Linda Sarsour, who both Sabeeha and I know we like a lot, and I think she has an absolute right to speak as a proud Palestinian American, but she sometimes demonizes Zionists in a way that I think is really goes too far. For example, she said famously at one time, it's impossible to be a Zionist and a feminist at the same time. And yet there are plenty of Zionist feminists in Israel and in America. Look, a broad range of American Jews do identify as Zionists, which is say they support the right of Israel to exist as a Jewish state. So that Zionism should not necessarily be demonized. And I think that's an important point, which I can follow up on. And following up on that, Muslims should engage with mainstream American Jews who consider themselves Zionists rather than allying exclusively with the anti-Zionist fringe groups, which are really a small percentage of the Jewish community, very small, 1 or 2%. And at the same time, Jews need to engage with Muslims like Tlaib, Omar, and Sarsour. Look, we disagree on Israel-Palestine, obviously, but there's a whole lot more that we agree on here at home, and we ought to be, we need to keep that in mind, and we need to strengthen our alliance. And finally, in that context, let's not let's be very careful about labeling each other either as anti-Semitic or Islamophobic. Criticizing Israeli policies or political leaders is just that. It's a criticism of policies. It is not a declaration against Jews. Likewise, being critical of the leaders or policies carried out by a Muslim country does not translate as Islamophobia. So we need to be keenly aware of the sensitivities on both sides, and we need to continue working to strengthen our alliance. And we thank you very much for listening, and happy to respond to questions.
Thank you so much. I've listened to this talk before. I've read the book, but I think I can still go through another session. So interesting. And I wish that in the next session, if we ever do, I'd like to focus on part 2 as well, tapping our roots. Besides what you have just mentioned, which is so very important, living as American Muslims or American Jews, but as immigrant human beings, tapping our roots was very, very interesting to me and very, very nostalgic. The way we conduct our book session is that after we have discussed the book, we allow each participant no more than a minute to either ask a question or to make a comment. So I will request everybody to be very brief and to be respectful of others' times. And I will go in the order in which I see in front of my screen. So Dr. Akbar Ali.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for this excellent presentation. I really enjoyed it. And I think you addressed some of the questions that rose in my mind. So I will pass on any question, but I really commend both of your efforts in this endeavor. And may God bless you both and your efforts.
Thank you very much.
Khalid Qazi.
Well, I have the same feeling as Akbar said, and for sure they have done a tremendous job, and I would like to listen more about that. Thank you.
Thank you. I really enjoyed. Sorry, I'm driving also, so just trying to focus on that as well as listening. but I'm really impressed with, thank you, Salim Bhai, that you have arranged this. One thing which I always struggle myself, and I think Walter nailed it at one point, that there are probably two people of different opinion. Some people think that, hey, let's focus on the commonalities, forget what are the differences. That way, at least we can start, sit together, have a dialogue. And then there is this other mantra that unless we fix the root causes, we are not going to resolve these issues. This will go on for generations because the root cause is there. It's like, you know, there is a dead dog in a well and you keep fetching the water, but because the problem is there and you haven't addressed the problem, that's what we face on other fronts in Pakistan also. I'm from Pakistan. So I felt the same Kashmir issue. So Israel-Palestinian issue, if that's not resolved in good faith, and if people on both sides don't wholeheartedly, genuinely believe in it and then fix it, then this condition will continue on and we will be struggling to keep these dialogues open. But at the end, these things will be just moving parallel. That's where I would like to have a little bit more input from you, that how can we really achieve the real goal?
Well, yeah, it's a very, very good and important question. And I think that what Sabeeha and I have, first of all, well, let me speak for myself. When I got involved in Muslim-Jewish relations, it was partly to, you know, having been involved for many years before that in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I wanted to make sure that we didn't import the fear and hatred and loathing that exists over there to here, because God forbid that could lead to violence between our two peoples here. And so that was, you know, that wasn't, you know, remains important focus. Then the second thing, obviously, is that we have so much in common, and we're also over here. I mean, as Sabeeha said, we are Americans first, and we have a common interest in preserving democracy and human rights but for both of our communities, and we can help each other in different ways in that. So it's clear that we have a reason to work here, which doesn't mean, though, that, okay, let's just forget about what's going on over there. Let's turn our eyes away from it. No, we certainly understand, and we you know, have come, I think, even more to appreciate in the last couple of years how we have to address it. And you know, one way actually that Sabeeha mentioned, that I personally have become involved with Project Rosanna, which is helping to save the lives of Palestinians through getting access to the Israeli healthcare system, training Palestinian and Israeli doctors together, other things like that. But you know, we've saved children. We've got children from the West Bank and Gaza who have cancer, and we've managed to get them to hospitals in Israel to save their lives. So that's one thing that our folks here together can support programs like that. I mean, Jews and Muslims together can be supportive of that as part of what we do. I mean, I think our main focus is here, but we want to be part of helping to move things over there and make things go in a better direction. So that's one way. There's many other options along those lines as well, of different not-for-profit, non-governmental organizations that are doing amazing work over there to heal the very bitter rift over there. So we can't. On the other hand, we can't say, all right, well, until that is solved, until there's a peace agreement, until everything is fine, we're gonna boycott each other over here. So, you know, it's a tough dynamic, and we struggle with it every day. But we believe that the Muslim-Jewish relationship in America is very, very important, and we need to strengthen that. So that's how I would.
Dr. Khalid Sadozai.
Can you unmute yourself?
Yes, this is Khalid Sadozai. Thank you very much for your beautiful work. It has been a great work and great listening to you both. Actually, like Dr. Salim, I have been involved with interfaith activities from last more than 25 years, and we have refused to be enemies. And one thing, my question is just on the lines of which Dr. Ramzan asked, that during this COVID time, I have been wondering a little bit, because I have a lot of time at my hands, that out of all these so many years of interfaith dialogues and everything, although I must say we have very good Jewish friends who have come for our help for over here, but we have not made any dent on the ground reality in Palestine. And the sufferings of the Palestinian peoples haven't changed. So I was wondering that isn't all, I'm not saying that it's a waste of time, but we have not made any big difference, any big dent in the thinking of the Jewish people in United States and the Jewish organizations, and nor it has made any change, brought any dent in the ground reality in the Palestine. So I would like your input that how can we do our work should be more effective in bringing some change in the sufferings of the Palestinian people. And one other thing which I have been struggling a lot to understand, that although the Jewish people have been through the Holocaust and they have suffered so much, how can they are so unsensitive to the sufferings of the Palestinian people? I'm gonna say if you see the videos and other news items, and I'm gonna say it is your heart cries that how those people have been under this kind of situation for more than I think 70 years or so, whatever the time, I'm not counting the time, but it has been a very long time. Thank you very much. Any input will be great. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for both your questions. I believe, and this is my observation, that the work that you have been doing for the last 30 years has made a difference. Let's examine here in United States. I see a big shift, not as big as I would like it to be, but I definitely see a shift in the public opinion of being favorable to the plight of the Palestinians. I see this in the political arena, and I see this in other spheres like campuses as well. Most recently, you would have heard the news about the Anti-Defamation League offering an apology to the Cordoba House when they planned to build a Islamic center in downtown Manhattan. Nothing to do with Israel, but definitely a warming of some major Jewish groups towards the Muslim groups over here. The election of a woman of Palestinian descent to the Congress is a big deal. Their voices are being heard. We have the Jewish Voices for Peace that is being heard more and more in the public sphere. So I see definitely a warming up towards the plight of the Palestinians here in the United States that was not here 35 years ago. And on the ground in Palestine, in Israel, they now have a cabinet with Arab representation over there, whose focus is to improve the economic conditions of the Palestinians. So I think that your work has made a difference. And as to the second part of your question, Walter, would you like to take that on, which was about the plight of the Palestinians and the Holocaust and how one,
right. How could we, right. Yeah. Well, I just wanted to, before I get to that, just agree with you, Sabeeha, that, and I think that the Jewish community in the last number of years, and I'm talking about the mainstream Jewish community, has moved quite a distance from where we were, from where it was before, in understanding this. I mean, I think that the Netanyahu making that alliance with Trump was an eye-opener for many Jews, and seeing kind of where that kind of maximalist position would lead. So I think that there has been some important movement in the Jewish community. As far as the second part of the question, it's such a tough one, because somebody says, well, why, many, the speaker asked, and somebody said, well, how can you have gone through that and then be, oppress others? There is, unfortunately, this, and I don't want to make this as a glib comparison, but the idea that, if you abused children sometimes grow up to be abusers, and there is something in that. I think that tragically, that the Jews felt that sense of powerlessness that they experienced at that time. That my mother, that's part of the reason I was sharing my mother's story, is my mother was desperately trying to get out that her people were just being massacred, were being, you know, that Hitler was trying to eliminate every Jew in the world, and it seemed like nobody was, you know, the non-Jewish world didn't really care. That was how we kind of internalized it. And what came out of that, the lesson that came out of that for most Jews, is that we have to take our destiny in our own hands. We have to create our own state, because we can't afford to be powerless like that anymore. So that's what happened, and tragically, and I think it's kind of an existential tragedy, that the creation of that state was about returning to the, you know, to the biblical homeland where we had been driven out 2,000 years earlier by the Romans. That was let's rebuild our destiny on our own piece of land. Tragically, there was already another population living in that land when the Jews started coming back, and we didn't see them. I think it was very understandable that the Palestinians would have resisted and said, well, wait a minute, this is, you know, you can't just take over this land. But then that resistance, and sometimes it came in ugly forms, would lead the Jews to kind of harden their hearts to the Palestinians. And tragically, I would say, to me, it's very clear that what we need to do is find a way to share that land for the best interests of both peoples, to share it joyously, to be together there. And somehow that has not yet happened. I think that in the end, it will happen over decades, because they're both there, neither is going anywhere. And the whole question of, you know, at this point, I don't know if there is a two-state solution, because the two populations become so intermixed. So I think right now the challenge is to get the maximum amount of justice and for both communities, and both communities need to live securely and at peace. And it's a very, very tough thing, but I do think, and just to sum up, there is movement in the Jewish community and in Israel too. I mean, when I go there and I see the number of Israelis and Palestinians who are cooperating and doing wonderful things together to save lives, to encounter each other in so many beautiful ways. That's the part of the story you don't hear over here, because you only hear you hear about the wars, and you hear about the tough, you know, and all of that is real, and I don't want to sugarcoat it at all. But this other piece is there too, and I think over time, and the overthrow of Netanyahu is maybe the beginning of that. We will move in much more of that direction, because ultimately neither people wants this to go on for another 100 years, and you don't, you know, so that's where we're at. I hope
Thank you for the question.
A little bit. Yeah.
Thank you. Zeba.
So thank you so much, Sabeeha and Walter, for your excellent presentations, and I really enjoyed the book. And I just wanted to mention that I visited Israel a few years ago, and I was really blown away by the beauty of the place. And I went to actually Tel Aviv and Jerusalem with my daughter, and enjoyed the beautiful sights and the great beauty and spirituality of the Dome of the Rock. And then I think in Tel Aviv, I heard the sound of the Torah, the recitation of the Torah by a rabbi for the first time in my life. And I was really struck by that. And it seemed as if it was similar to that of the Quran, the pronunciation, the words and all that. So for a long time, I was there listening. And I was struck by the cohesiveness of the society. There was so much hustle and bustle on Friday at the marketplace, and then we visited one marketplace in Jerusalem and the other in Tel Aviv on Saturday, and it was all quiet, and I was almost, hearing the sound of all those shouts and voices, and 2 kilo strawberries for so much, and so it was really a moving experience for me. And then we went to Bethlehem. And that was beautiful too, but I could, sense the pain of the Palestinians, the graffiti and the settlements, all that I saw. And also a lot of significant tension. The bus would stop at the border as you entered back, to when you went back to Jerusalem, and the Palestinians were to, they were asked to, disembark, and then for further checking, and if they had anything or whatever, so then they would come back in. So all of that, but so it's a sad situation, and I hope there's some resolution. But there are so many similarities, religious, cultural. So that's my bit.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, very powerful, very, very powerful.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, Walter. Sorry, don't want to cut you off.
No, I just wanted to say that Ziba so beautifully, kind of encapsulated the duality of the situation, the great commonalities and the wonderfulness, and then the other side, which is so painful. So thank you, Zeba, for that beautiful summation.
Yeah.
I'm glad that Zeba didn't have to go through what Sabeeha had to go through in one of your chapters.
Yes.
On your visit. Yeah, that was a painful story. Next is Pervez Majeed.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much, Sister Sabeeha and Brother Walter, for your presentation. I love the way how you alter between you, and after Sister Sabeeha narrates some experience of her own, then she asks Brother Walter to narrate his opinion or his side. I love the way how you compare that. Thank you for that. I have been part of interfaith with Brother Salim for more than 15 years, and I'm yet to meet a Jew who hates a Muslim or a Muslim who hates a Jew. That's all in interfaith. But what I don't see is when there is a conflict, we don't see those voices, those people who we meet give their voice to the media, or at least media is not getting those voices to the media, kind of thing. How can we highlight those during conflicts? Because during the conflict, it doesn't matter what happens in Pakistan or India. I'm from India. What opinion people have there, the opinion of people who are in America, Americans' opinion matters when there's a conflict. We don't see that voice coming up. How can we highlight those? Thank you. I'll take opinion on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we, maybe, people like ourselves have and people who care about this cause, we really have a responsibility to try to amplify those voices and make sure they're heard, because they are there. I mean, obviously, when the actual shooting starts and the bombs start flying, it's much harder to, during those moments, to really stand up, or for those people over there to stand up. There's a big cost to that, sometimes placed on them, on both sides. But they're there, and I think I just see my role is to try to, one of my roles is to try to get awareness, in meetings like this, that there are many Israelis who care, see the Palestinians as their brothers and sisters, and are trying in many different ways to reach out and connect, and vice versa. And that still goes on, and I think it's actually becoming stronger. So I think, what I can do is just, share that.
And, I'd like to share that when this year the Gaza conflict broke out, the interfaith organizations did put out press releases. So, for example, the Sisterhood of Salam Shalom took a position which was actually pro-Palestinian, the Al-Aqsa Mosque and, some of the other skirmishes that followed after that, and put out that statement not only to the elected officials, but also to the press. Now, if the press doesn't pick up on it, that's an issue that we need to deal with. So we may not have the major networks picking up and amplifying our voices, but we do have social media, and that is our media. And that's one way to get attention.
Yes, Rashid Sheikh. Rashid is not only my neighbor, he's also a very important social and political activist in our community. He has run for public positions as well, and has really brought the cause of the Muslims to the light, at least in local politics, but he's also very involved nationally and internationally. Rashid.
Thank you, Dr. Salim. This is honestly, I was a little, pessimistic about this book, and When I bought the book, I thought this only kind of deals with the strategic direction. But as I hear this beautiful presentation, very unique, it was almost like you are watching a movie. So however you came up with this whole methodology, I mean, this is a great methodology and it's very effective. So thank you for that presentation. And what it gave me is it's not only strategic, but it's also very tactical and educational, kind of dealing with this a huge issue. It's a very, very big issue. No one can really get a grasp on it, but I think we can take baby steps. So one of the question or comment would be that, are you guys working on a next step? And if you are, perhaps sometime things are hidden in the books and not visible. Perhaps if you lay out what baby steps can we take to understand each other and hence also help the human cause, because I believe it's bigger than Jews and Muslims. It's more of a humanity at stake when we have conflicts like like we have in Palestine and Israel. So your comment on that would be great. And then also one comment about Walter's comment, lesson learned. He said we cannot weaponize Israel-Palestinian conflict to kind of, I don't want to take his words, but basically what my understanding was that basically to create a dealing among us. Yes, we cannot weaponize, but at the same time, no matter how much we say it, we cannot forget, because it's a very human issue. And if honestly we don't talk about it, we don't think about it, and we don't really take heed from it, then we basically are becoming inhuman. So if we could take these baby steps and more Jewish brothers talk about the Palestinian rights and more Muslim brothers and sisters talk about Israel's rights, that might be a way to amend and help each other. And so anyway, at the end of the day, I'll just take these two questions, comments, and I really, really appreciate it. I'm so happy that we did this today.
Well, thank you so much. And what that maybe what you're asking was what Sabeeha and I tried to lay out a little bit with our eight conclusions, what we've learned, and but I want to tell you about something that I was involved. I'm involved with an organization called Jamaat in Washington. It's called Jews and Muslims and Allies Acting Together, and so we are taking as our core issue that for us strengthening the Muslim-Jewish alliance comes first, and Israel-Palestine, for example, should not supplant it. So that's what I mean by weaponizing. So one example of what we did is we issued a statement which got quite a bit of publicity in the Washington area after this was right in the aftermath of what happened in May. And in particular, one thing that happened here was that a woman, a Muslim elected official, or she's a member of the school board, she's elected to the school board in Fairfax County, Virginia. She put on her social media that she was deeply, deeply upset by what was happening during those days, and what happened with the Israeli troops breaking into the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and that that it was. I forget, I don't have her words right in front of me, but it got a lot of the Jewish community very upset, and they started saying to her, the Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Washington said that she was somehow, by saying these things, she was somehow disenfranchising the Jewish students of the public schools in Fairfax County. And so the Jamaat came out and we issued a statement saying that she has an absolute right to say those things, to say that she's deeply upset by what's happening over there, and that she should not be censured, because the Republican Party, as soon as the Jewish Community Relations Council, made this statement, they were saying, okay, she should be expelled from her position for anti-Semitism. And so we wrote, this is not anti-Semitism. She's saying she was personally hurt, personally as a Muslim and as a human being by seeing what was happening, and she has an absolute right to speak out. So those are some of the kinds of things that we're advocating on both sides, that we can't the attack on her by the JCRC was in a sense saying, well, she attacked Israel, so she shouldn't be able to serve here in Virginia, which to us is a very dangerous and wrong-headed thing. And so that I was very happy that we were able to say that.
And if I may add, currently we are, we meaning some of the interfaith organizations like the Sisterhood of Salam Shalom, like the Muslim Jewish Solidarity Committee, are now doing training sessions on how to have difficult conversations, how to address these issues that we have avoided all along in a manner where we are able to hear each other out, listen to what where each of us is coming from, and understand where we're coming from, and not necessarily solve the problem in the Middle East, but at least be able to engage in a conversation without impacting our relationship over here. So these training sessions are rolling out and people are participating in that. And because these are conversations we do need to have.
Go ahead, Tariq.
Hello, hi. Assalam to all of you. It's been a topic which has always been very close to my heart, and I felt it's something we seriously lack because we are mostly listening to our governments. Instead of listening to our governments, or in addition to listening to the governments, it'll be much better if the Jews and the Muslims interact with each other, because I once had an opportunity of spending about 2 or 3 hours at the airport with a Jewish group, about 6-7 people, very Orthodox looking Jews, but I really had a great time with them. So you, in the beginning, I think I joined a bit late, I'm sorry for that, mentioned about some books. I would like to know the names of those books. One or two books were mentioned in this context.
Oh, yeah. So in the beginning, we were talking about Walter writing a blurb on behalf of the rabbi for the book that I had published.
Right, okay.
It's called Threading My Prayer Rug. I'll put it in the chat.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Tariq. Dr. Muhammad Yusuf.
Yes, assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Thank you very much, Sabeeha Rehman and Walter Bhai, for your excellent presentation and for your book. And thank you, Dr. Salim, also for arranging this. I admit that I'm a slow reader, so I could not finish the book. But whatever I have read, it was very engaging, very emotional actually. When I encounter an incident in which Sabeeha Rehman meets with a Jew and creates an understanding, and so it looks to me like a family member, who is lost, for years and years, and all of a sudden one day he knocks at your door. So this is the kind of feeling I had, and it was very emotional for me. And in some instances, I actually started crying. My first encounter with a Jew was when I came here as a PhD student, and my graduate advisor was a Jew. And I was really shocked, by the nice behavior, he showed to me, the help he offered to me, the guidance he offered to me. He would offer tea to me, when I would be in his office. Actually, he had lived in Pakistan for some time, and therefore he could speak a few words of Urdu also. So that was another good connection. But I would give his example, to people, and tell them that those people who think that the Jews are all Jews are same and they are all not good. I used to tell people, that my experience is different, also I would just briefly say that Jews enjoyed, good positions in Islamic caliphates, in Baghdad and in Spain. And when Spain fell, then, most of the Jews, they found places, in Muslim lands. And therefore, Muslims and Jews relationship was not that strained, all the time. They enjoyed good relationships. throughout the history. It is only recently that this Israeli-Palestinian issue has created this strain, and we hope that efforts like yours will improve the situation, and that issue will be resolved, in coming years and decades, and inshallah, then we will all enjoy good brotherly relations again. Thank you again.
Shall
So thank you very much, both of you. I enjoy reading your book, and basically and presentation, both of them are very well organized, orchestrated. It is very close to related to my own experience. My first job was through an Israeli Jew, and I worked with Orthodox Jew for 12 years as my boss, and that was one of the best time of my life. So and at the same time, actually, I worked with Israeli Palestinians as well, and so I know both sides of the story. But I agree with your point of view. Whatever problem we can solve locally, we have to solve them locally, and we cannot solve the global problems by delaying the local things. So it is a wonderful book, and I think everybody need to read it. So again, thank you very much, both of you and Dr. Salim for introducing us to this. Greatly appreciate. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for reading the book, and thank you for your feedback. Please tell your friends about it.
Yeah, I think
you can jump in anytime you can. Go ahead, Walter.
I was just going to say thank you so much to Shahid and to Muhammad Yunus for that personal testimony about their close relationships with Jews and as friends and as colleagues. It's very, very powerful and meaningful. That's ultimately what it's all about, that we are all human beings, and if we can meet each other, find ways to meet each other, whether it's through job type things or study, or through groups, some of the groups, Muslim Jewish groups that have grown up around the country, it just we can have the opportunity to humanize each other and see that we're each of us as an individual, each of us carries that spark within us, and that's really what it's so important. So thank you for
to hear me now?
Yes. Go ahead, Shela. Go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah. So this is for Walter especially. I hope it's not too late to say Shana Tova, right? I hope I've pronounced it correctly.
Very good. Shana Tova. A happy Jewish you. She's wishing me a happy Jewish New Year, which that's fine, Shela. I'm honored to receive it, and a few weeks late doesn't matter. Thank you.
Okay, so to Sabeeha's point, I think when she said only in darkness can you see the star, I had a terrific supervisor for my master's, which I did in clinical cytopathology at St. Mary's Hospital and Medical School in London. And she was great. She was very supportive, and I think I owe my master's a lot to her because I was going through a tough period. And regarding the interfaith organization, which I strongly support at my place of work, recently organized and led an educational event on Rosh Hashanah. And we had a talk given by a very knowledgeable Jewish colleague. And I think a lot of education needs to go in from both sides to bring both the teams, let's say, together. At that event, I know he also blew the shofar, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And it was a good experience. Bottom line for me, and I pray like anyone else that, we resolve the differences. And for me, it's like, if you get a paper cut and if I get a paper cut, I think the pain is the same.
Thank you so much, Shela.
That's a beautiful quote.
Right.
Brother Zakir Makhdoom.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you. It was a very nice presentation. It was very good to hear. And my experience is pretty much similar to on the lines that was other people are talking about. I was listening I worked as a consultant in a lot of places, and I worked with agencies. So sometimes people would just introduce me as another Jewish, like they would say Zakir is a Jewish name. And that was, I told them I'm Muslim. They don't worry about it. He said, we know you Muslim, but we're not trying to make you Jew, but we feel that connection with you. So people are generally nice, trying to work with you and things. And this presentation was like took to the next level, hearing your stories, and it was very pleasant. Thank you. And Salim bhai, thank you for arranging this.
Good. And now we come to one of the pioneers of our community, Dr. Mohammad Mushtaq. He graduated from Dow Medical College in 1975. So I think he's a little junior to Dr. Khalid Rahman.
Yes, by about 6 years.
He's just exaggerating the whole thing. I just say nobody wants to this conflict end sooner than I do, because I see in the future in this country problems coming for minorities, but especially for us Muslims, and I feel that if any community is going to come to our help, and in fact they already have at some instances, but in a major problem in the future, that will be the Jewish community. So believe me, if this issue of Israeli-Palestinian, we don't care how it's solved, just gets solved, I think our relationships will grow in a supersonic speed, and nobody will benefit more from that than we the Muslims, we the American Muslims. So I pray for that, and thank you very much. This was very, very nicely conducted and very impressive, and we appreciate everybody's efforts. Thank you again.
That was a pretty powerful statement. Thank you.
Yeah, this is a great presentation by Sabeeha and Walter, and Dr. Salim did a wonderful job to arrange all this. But I just would like to mention the one thing. It's everybody I know as a interfaith, the meetings, as Dr. Khalid Saduzai mentioned, there's a 30 plus years connectivity. We always going through the religious point of view, that they're like a religious side. This never worked. The present situation in the leadership role in the world is not accepting the religious only things, just like in Taliban, Afghanistan things, or either in Israel, or either in Pakistan things. So always fight happen between the religious side. But why not we target to the leadership?
Thank you, Imtiaz.
Yeah, just very briefly, I would agree that that's a very important part of it, and I think that organizations, like my own Jamaat in Washington are trying to do that. That we're taking positions, and because if folks who think like us don't do that together, then the politicians only hear from the groups that are harder line and are saying and they're responding to that. So I really agree with what you just said.
Now let me finish this round because we have only 3 more people left who have not spoken. Before Zahid Hussain, do you have anything to say?
Well, thank you very much for this excellent presentation. It's been a great learning experience for me. Thank you very much for your time. God bless you all.
Thank you. Brother Shoaib Khan.
Sorry, unmute myself. Assalamu alaikum, shalom. I would like to thank you for an excellent presentation indeed, Sabeeha Behen and Walter. I would just narrate my first encounter, quote unquote, with a Jew. I was posted to London. I worked for IBM, so I was posted there. And I was sitting beside one of my colleagues. He was a Jew. And gradually, he was my age in those days, and I'm talking of 1997, 98. we got friends, and we never, talked about anything about religion or political affairs and so on. But so we grew a lot of friendship. And one day, I was really very happy that he invited me to his house for dinner. And I took this opportunity. It was an excellent gesture on his part. And I went, and unfortunately, my wife couldn't come with me that day. So I went there and had dinner with the family. And I was so comfortable there because I knew that the meat there is kosher. So I was all right in eating that meat. And the second is that I had a legal advisor when I was in Dubai, of course, under IBM. So our legal advisor and our director of legal affairs was also a Jew. And she was a lady. And we had excellent discussions and relationships. And we used to sit together, chat together, and so on. So I'm new here to the US, unfortunately, just a few years only. But I agree that we need to do a lot of transactional or community-related work together and strengthen it to an extent that we have a voice big enough and loud enough, which can be heard by these politicians and which can understand and influence them. And they start looking at that all of us, both Jews and the Muslims, would like that conflict be resolved, and particularly the Palestinian conflict. And therefore, one only question I had was, I would like to put to you both is, are you issuing any newsletter or something of the community which says what things have been done in a month, last month or last 2 months or so?
Newsletter, sort of. I do put out a newsletter every now and then, not on a weekly or a monthly basis, but when I have enough to report, I do put out a newsletter. And if you want to sign up for that, I'll just put down my email address in the chat, and then you can sign up for that. And in that, I do highlight the talks we hold and the kind of questions that are raised. I also have a website, I'll put that in the chat as well, where I put up information related to the kind of work that I am involved in. I also write a blog, and that blog is on my website. And there I will put up whatever is happening in the world and my opinion about it. So those are some of the tracks that I am involved in. Walter?
Thank you.
Yeah, well, I'm actually sitting down tomorrow to write a kind of a speech, which I'll put up on my blog about. We have in 1 week we have a meeting of Jamaat, and so I want to share some of the thoughts that how do we move Muslim-Jewish relations? We're calling it rekindling the Muslim-Jewish relationship, which was set back somewhat by what happened in May. And so I'd be happy to share that also. I'll be putting it up on my blog, which I think is anyway. We'll figure out a way to keep it.
Thank you.
And Brother Khalil from Pakistan.
Assalamualaikum, everyone. I have thoroughly enjoyed the presentation. Thank you, Walter and Sabeeha Behan. I think, Walter, you hit the bottom line when you said we should keep on humanizing each other. So that's what I've learned, and that's what I believe in. And let me tell you one thing. In the last decade and a half, I have lived only 10 to 15% of my time in Karachi, Pakistan, and rest of my life in Netherlands. So that's my second home. And you can imagine living in Netherlands, you are living with the Jew community. And I'm in Amsterdam, it's County Amstelveen. And now I do a business which is related to water. And in recent years, Jews have really championed the water sciences. And well, we do business with the Dutch community, but now we have problems, doing directly business with the Israel. But then we do, some artistic ways to do it, because like my business base, I'm bringing some technology into Pakistan, which is required here. So that's the first pain that I feel, vis-a-vis relationship with the Muslim and Israeli community.
That's really, really interesting. And you're so right. I mean, when you need water, that's one would think that that should transcend these conflicts. We all need water to survive, and we're especially the way, with climate change, and it's so important that we find ways to work together on all of these things. And certainly Israel has a lot of really great water technology. So I hear what you're saying.
Thank you.
Very true. Very
Thank
true.
you. Now we go to Tahir Ali, who should get the credit for doing all the work behind the scenes for setting up this meeting. Tahir Ali.
I think I want to ask a question from your book is that you wrote join forces with like-minded Americans. That's what you said, quote unquote. Now I'm going to ask you a question. Before you answer the question, I'm going to say a few more things before that. How do you find these like-minded American? How did you find them? So you have to think about that before you answer that. Now I want to also add that we, like has been said by Dr. Salim Khalani, we have been in the interfaith so long, I think so 40 years, 30 years now, that we have been having our friends talk with our Jewish community and the Christian community and ourselves also, with a lot of interact between. We went to their synagogue, they come to our masjid, and we go to their churches and vice versa. We wrote press releases when there was anything disturbance in the Jewish community, like somebody attacked the synagogue or their graveyard. We were the first one to write, condemn that act, and we wrote the press releases. It was released through our Islamic Society of Greater Worcester and the Worcester Islamic Centers, and they're all documented all over the place. Now, reading your book, it was very interesting because you mentioned something which we have gone through also. There's in fact, you had mentioned somewhere in the book that there was a table where in front of the rabbi met along, and you were on a table, and then at each table there was a Jewish community member and some other members there, and then somebody would say, hey, we need a Jew person here, can somebody come here? And somebody said, we need a Muslim, there's somebody missing in the table. And then the rabbi said, this is heaven.
This is heaven.
Because I'm, and I quote, he said, when I can have someone call and said, we need a Jew, we need a Muslim. He said, this is heaven, unquote. So that came back very well, because we remember, Dr. Salim, we do the same thing also with our group also. We have tables and we do our interaction. So similar to that also. So that was very interesting to see. And then you went to go ahead, interfaith dialogue by the sidewalk, and then garden chats and all that. We went through the process exactly the same way we did. So it sort of gave us back our thing. And then something in the book that you written, very simple questions, like we would come across each other when we first meet. Has the groom ever gotten hurt by the shattered glass? Those are small quotations, but those are very nice to hear, because there's a lot of history behind it. Now I'm going to say this for a reason, because I wrote this book, The Muslim Vote Counts. I think you can see that. And this was in 2004. This is not a commercial break, by the way. It's just, the reason I brought this up is because in my book I wrote, and I'm going to quote from, it's a chapter which I call Gideon's Way. And this chapter was on Rabbi Gideon Golden Holes. And I met him in Toronto, so I wrote a chapter on him. And one of the things that I want to quote from the book is, I was curious to see if he really knew why the Jewish community might live in the proximity of their synagogue. And he quoted, because they are required to walk to their synagogue, and for the same reason, the Israeli airlines do not fly on Saturdays. Now, the reason I'm saying that is when I took my manuscript to an editor, publisher, and this is Wyndham Hall. So he said, he looked at it, he said, and he read my manuscript. He said, I didn't know that the reason they walk and they don't work on Saturdays is because of Sabbath. He didn't know that also. So much information is out there, but we don't know about it unless we get to each other. So I'm glad you read my book. So we got that part also. So thank you very much. Now I'm going to ask for the answer. How do you find these like-minded Americans? Thank you very much.
So thank you for that question. They find us is the easy answer. So for example, we did a book talk at a synagogue in Massachusetts, and attending there was Salim Bhai, who then said, come and do a book talk with us. And I wouldn't be surprised if one day somebody from your group approaches us and says, you know, my community would like you to come and do a book talk. The first book talk that Walter and I did was literally 9 months before the book came out. And this was at a conflict resolution center. It was on Zoom. And the next day we got 4 invitations from 4 different groups asking us to come and do a book talk. And from that, then more book talks were generated. So it was almost like, you know, the flowering of a tree, and the branches and the buds and the blooming. So that's essentially, it's word of mouth is how it happens. But it's also, it takes some effort on our part. Walter can talk a little bit about it, but we have our social media, and our social media has like-minded people in it for the most part. And we do a lot of book promotion and book talk promotions over there, which does yield an interest in getting together and having this dialogue.
And nobody works harder at that than Sabeeha Rehman. So she does an amazing work, and it's helped me greatly. Yeah.
So Tahir, I will answer you from our perspective. Remember when we started our Ramadan fast and so dinner and lecture program. So every Ramadan, at the end of the month, the last Sunday, not Saturday, we have an interfaith program where we choose a topic of common interest to Muslims, Christians, Jews, atheists, Hindus, whoever. And everybody speaks and others listen and share their experiences. We started with probably less than 10 people the first time around. And if you had asked me a question, where will you find like-minded people? The answer is now there are more than 200 people attending that program. It's just word of the mouth that people started to invite each other. They started sending us emails. Can I bring a friend? Can I bring my wife? Can I bring this and that? So Iqbal had shared Sabeeha Ben, मैं अकेला ही चला था जानिबे मंजिल मगर लोग साथ आते गए और कारवां बनता गया. That I set out for my journey all alone, but people started to join me and the caravan formed. Rashid Sheikh.
Wow.
By the way, Tahir is a Jewish name, you guys, you know.
What is it? Well, I forgot my Hanukkah. It's somewhere sitting out.
So just want to follow up on a couple of things different brothers have said, including Tahir Ali, that how do you find like-minded people, or how do you really take it to the community level? I just want to remind that when, my first bid for selectman in Shrewsbury, I was approached by a few people, and one of that was a senior, very nice Jewish man who actually offered to become my campaign manager. And honestly, neither did he think for a second that, hey, it's a Muslim guy who I'm bringing in. And nor did I think twice that is it really a Jewish guy who's becoming my campaign manager and setting my strategy. Definitely, he was very much experienced person, and he basically had very strong views. But what was the biggest learning lesson for me was that there were so many people watching us. And even though I didn't win the election, but I won was anywhere I went, people was really appreciating local communities, different social networks. People are watching you, and people were making comments. Wow, a Muslim and a Jew working together. So, and there were so many hits on the website on, so many people were watching it. So many people got to know, because I wasn't hiding my religion or myself, and he wasn't hiding himself either. His name was Leo Feinstein. Everybody know where that name come from. And my name is Rashid Sheikh. So many people got to know goodness in us. It it was really mind-boggling. And I think that's really maybe one of the assets in my life. So I believe that this is a multifaceted issue, and we have to take every single approach we can, like Dr. Salim Khalani, mashallah, and Dr. Khalani and Dr. Mushtaq and many, I have been working very hard. There are fruits there. So any level, especially in the communal level, we can work on day-to-day basis. There are people around us. Whatever we can do together, people are always watching us, and these things will, inshallah, make a difference. And especially working together on political issues, because we have to take each other's strength. Now, we have some strengths, and our Jewish brothers and sisters have some strengths, especially they have political strength. They have communication strength. So it's great that Sabeeha, Sister Sabeeha and Walter work together on their strengths. If we can really ride on each other's strengths and do whatever we can, I think it will really make a difference. Jazakallah.
Beautifully stated, Rashid.
So it's open for everybody for the next 5 minutes. Anybody wants to add something, ask a question before we thank our learned writers.
But Salim Khalani, you haven't said anything.
Well, I've said a lot. I've already
we
said
should
a
hear
lot.
from you.
I quoted Iqbal.
Normally at the end, we have Dr. Salim Khalani do a very good wrap up of the whole program. So I think we're missing that. So are you going to do it at the end, or are you going to we're not going to let you pass it, by the way?
No, as I said, that I was totally swept off my feet at the first meeting, and this is building the momentum, continuing the momentum. And I don't know if people are interested or not, but I definitely am interested in finishing the rest of the book with the authors themselves, hearing directly from the horse's mouth their experiences, which all of us actually share when we go back to our country. One thing that I want to end that brought my tears to my eyes last night, I was talking to my family when Sabeeha Ben mentioned that every time she goes back to Pakistan, there are far fewer people now to connect with. We all have that experience. My mom is not there. Next year, my aunt is not there. Next year, my uncle is not there. So much. Thank you so much, both of you.
Walter, I had one. I'm sorry, Walter, I had something for you. You know, you talked about a fundraiser. You went to Islam fundraiser and all that, and then you saw all that money being given away. I actually, there was somebody who went to this fundraiser, and he was, I think, from the Jewish community, and he was conducting one of the. She was sitting there, and she was looking at this, the way the fundraising was going on in the Islamic Center, and you know how they do it. $1,000. We got $1,000, and then then the next thing they say Takbir, and everybody said Allahu Akbar.
Yes.
And they said, he said another 500 from so and so. Then he said Takbir, and so and so, and then it keeps on going. And then the innocent Jewish community, Jewish lady went to ask this person, you know, this is a good fundraiser. They raised about like more than a few 100,000. And who was this guy, Takbir? He gave a lot of money. So I got a laugh out of that.
That's a good one.
That is really good. It's so true.
Yeah.
So true. Yeah, it is very effective. I would say I've seen it a few times.
Works when nothing works.
Well,
Excellent program.
I'd like
Excellent.
to say that, we need your help. We need your help in continuing to get our message out. This is a great beginning, and we appreciate the forum.